operators, sometimes there was a difference between when they started free time, when they started demurrage, and it was hard to understand from terminal to terminal. At least that's what I understood. I don't think that's accurate, at least on the West Coast. All terminals are governed by a port tariff. Port tariffs are different in each port, but the terminal operator does not have the right or responsibility to determine their own when free time starts or ends and when demurrage starts. It's all tariff related that we have to follow. When we look at demurrage for us as a terminal operator, we honestly believe that if the shipper or the BCO is not responsible for not picking up their container in free time, that it's basically our fault. We do not bill demurrage. We waive demurrage 100% of the time. And I have never got a complaint from anybody who says that that's not a fact. Our general managers who run the terminals have complete authority to waiver demurrage, but only waiver our demurrage, terminal demurrage. They don't have authority to waiver steamship company demurrage. And sometimes we'll be willing to waiver our demurrage, but for some reason or not, the steamship company will not be willing to waiver their demurrage. So then it looks as though to the trucker or to the BCO that it's the terminal operator that's not waiving the demurrage. And I don't think the industry understands, the difference between, again, what the demurrage is for a terminal operator and how it's collected and who gets that revenue. When we talk about it, I noticed that there was some comments that the petition was saying if it's not the shipper's problem, they shouldn't be paying demurrage. I mean, that's very difficult to talk about in a general discussion. Somebody can say, which they have to us, there was an accident on the freeway. It's not my fault. Well, we don't know there was an accident on the freeway. And even if there wasn't, that's not, that's not our responsibility. You have to understand that a terminal operator, as much as the steamship companies are competing together or with each other, the industry is tough for all of us, including terminal operators. We only make our money by volume. We make no money by containers staying on the dock. We have to move volume through the terminals to be able to survive. And that's why a lot of terminal operators have not been able to survive. They haven't been able to get the volume. When containers stay on the terminal and don't move, they take a spot of another container that could come off a ship or go on a ship. And that's what we want. We want that container gone, off, and delivered. 95% of demurrage that we have is import demurrage. Very little export demurrage. We have to understand that too. In export demurrage, terminal operators, at least in the most part, do not bill BCOs. They do not bill truckers. Terminals bill the steamship company for all export demurrage. But I'm talking about cargo demurrage, dock demurrage. And the reason being is that most terminal operators do not receive cargo for a ship before free time. So if a ship's coming in on a certain day, you get 4 days or whatever it is, we will not receive containers before that free time. So that's controlled there. The only time demurrage is, is billed is if that ship is delayed. Ship is due to come in the first of the month. We receive for 4 days. It's delayed and doesn't come in until the 4th or the 3rd, and then there's demurrage. We bill the steamship company. And then it's up to the steamship company to decide whether they want to bill the exporter or not. And I believe in most cases they don't. Finally, if we look at, some people have talked about ways that we can possibly help the delivery process, appointment system. You know, we believe strongly that appointment system on imports, which is 95% of the problem, is what needs to be done. With our operation, we don't want appointments on anything but imports. And the reason being is that we can push out a lot of trucks on empties in, empties out, and exports in. We do not want appointments there because if we do, it'll cost more labor because we'll have to extend that time for receiving and delivering empties and exports, and it's just not a problem today, at least not what we think. There is, you know, the industry has talked about a peel-off mode of operation, that is to separate containers off the ship into certain areas that can be delivered in a random access. If that can ever be done, that would work and would help the delivery process. We're doing that today a lot, but we're doing it with big shippers. We haven't been able to get shippers to work with other shippers and truckers to work with other truckers to be able to go in a peel-off pile where anybody can pick up any containers. But the big shippers, we do separate the containers out of the normal delivery runs, and we put equipment there, and those peel-off process containers can go maybe 5 times as fast as a normal process. We can do maybe 40, 50 an hour as opposed to a normal delivery process under what is called a transtainer, about 8 or 9 an hour. So that is something that could be considered as a solution.
Okay.
Lastly,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Lastly, it concerns us that quite frankly, if I may say, that you're going to come up with some rules that are mainly trying to point at a problem that is more detention and per diem than it is terminal demurrage. That's going to affect us, and that's going to force us to keep containers on the terminal longer than what we want them to be. And we want to try to clear that up to you and to explain the difference so that if you do come up with any rules through any petition, that you understand that there's really, you have to understand the terms between demurrage, per diem, and detention. You can't put it all in one package. Thank you.
Chairman Curry, Commissioner Dye, and Maffei, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the Commission on this important subject. I am president of the National Association of Waterfront Employers, NAWI, which is the voice in Washington of the Marine Terminal Operator and stevedore, otherwise referred to as the MTO or operator. The petitioners ask you to initiate a rulemaking to adopt a policy on this subject. It would dictate terms as to when and by how much operators are compensated. Petitioners allege the policy is necessary because current practices are unfair and unreasonable. Based upon my interviews with operators on all coasts, including both members and non-members of NAWI, it is our position that current practices work fairly and reasonably, that the proposed policy would be complex and damaging to the productivity of our nation's ports. It would impose a regulatory solution when the commercial one is working. The free time and demurrage and detention charges applicable to cargo are the product of a series of negotiations between sophisticated commercial enterprises, the port and the MTO and the ocean carrier and its customer. The negotiations take into account the risk associated with the international transportation of cargo, including weather, port and terminal productivity, customs requirements, and many others. The results vary based upon bargaining power and local conditions. The proposed regulatory policy would ignore the market factors, reduce flexibility, and unintentionally create winners and losers. I will illustrate the differences between the status quo and the proposed policy using examples involving a weather-related port shutdown and a single box failure. Our ports recently experienced hurricane and severe winter closures. These events varied in duration and impact. The general response to each weather-related event was to extend free time as long as the cargo is in the grace period. This was a fair and reasonable concession of the cargo interests. The prospective rule would not provide improvement. If the weather event occurred after free time and during the demurrage period, the cargo interest was generally granted an extension of free time for the duration of the closure, but required to pay the detention and demurrage for the days in between free time and the event causing inability. The multi-day Hurricane Harvey in Houston created such community challenges that greater concessions were extended even though terminal operation returned to normal. This exceptional response was authorized by the governing board of the port, which had ties to the community and the greatest familiarity with local conditions, and responded accordingly by extending free time. Individual claims of disability, on the other hand, are always more challenging and evaluated on their individual merits. The easy case is if the cargo interest arrives within free time, but the operator or its operating system is unable to produce the cargo. The MTO extends free time. On the other hand, let us assume a cargo interest claims it is unable to get inside the gate on the last day of 10 days of free time, a day on which operations may have been slower than normal due to a cause the operator did not have control over, while continuing to clear cargo from its terminal. If the terminal operator had no record of any effort to previously collect the cargo during free time and receives no proof of any other disabling circumstances from the cargo interest, additional free time is unlikely to be granted. This is fair and reasonable and consistent with the negotiated agreement and the purpose of imposing demurrage charges, providing an incentive to pick up the cargo promptly. If the cargo interest failed to pick up the cargo during free time and then later found it unable to due to an uncontrollable event during demurrage time, the operator is unlikely to extend any free time. It is assumed the cargo interest had the opportunity to pick up cargo during free time and did not. Again, this can be a fair and predictable result. It incentivizes the cargo interest to manage the cargo outflow and pick up within free time. A petitioner's approach to relieve the cargo interest for risk of delay whenever the delay was beyond its control would reframe the initial negotiations and undermine the incentive to pick up cargo. The cargo interest is frequently the entity best positioned to avoid uncontrollable events by managing its cargo effectively. Petitioners would have the Commission adopt a policy that applies uniformly across all ports in all situations. Such a policy would supersede the commercial negotiations that currently set free time related charges and would take away the ability of operators to protect port efficiency by maintaining the incentive to remove cargo from marine terminals. Instead of allowing operators to provide relief when warranted, the proposed policy would shift all risk to the operators. The status quo is operating well, and in those cases where cargo interests disagree, they have the opportunity to seek redress locally and with the Commission under current rules. The petition should not be granted. Looking back at the hearing, there are 4 matters that strike me: productivity, compensatory, infrastructure, and the Pillsbury Doughboy. Productivity in that operators are a volume business optimizing millions of TEUs, not one. Compensatory in that cargo interests really don't want to pay what it takes to compensate to keep that box. Infrastructure in that the mitigation efforts described for the winter events only point out how effective the operators are compared with the local infrastructure. We should be having the discussion up the road. And finally, the Pillsbury Doughboy, in that pursuant to the discussion you've had with John Butler in the last panel, you push in one place, and you might be able to do it as hard as it may be, and I agree with John on that, but you're also going to anticipate pushing out in another place. In a government regulation for government interests, such as antitrust violations, there may be a risk, a valid risk. For commercial reasons, you assume the commercial risk as well. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Acting Chairman Corey and Commissioners Dye and Maffei. I am President of GCT USA, a subsidiary of GCT Global Container Terminals Incorporated. GCT USA operates 2 Green Marine certified marine terminals in the United States, both in the Port of New York, one in Bayonne and one on Staten Island. I have 33 years' experience in the marine cargo handling industry, working on both the carrier and the MTO side. GCT Bayonne and GCT New York are also members of the Port of New York and New Jersey Sustainable Services Agreement and Port of New York and New Jersey Port Authority Marine Terminal Operators Agreement, which are FMC-filed discussion agreements that focus on matters relating to promoting environmentally sensitive, efficient, and secure marine terminal operations. These agreements have submitted comments to the docket on this issue, and I respectfully refer the commissioners to those documents. I am also chairman of the Sustainable Services Agreement and president and chairman of the board of the Sustainable Terminal Services, Inc., known in the industry as STS. STS is a nonprofit corporation created by the 6 container terminal operator members of the Sustainable Services Agreement for the purpose of developing and implementing an RFID-based technology platform to identify trucks entering the terminals as a means of enhancing terminal security and efficiency. You'll hear more about the work of STS and how GCT has leveraged the technology platform to increase velocity. In addition, I also am chair of the Gate Operations Team of the Council for Port Performance, or CPP as it's referred to, which was formed by the port industry stakeholders in the Port of New York and New Jersey to provide oversight on the implementation of programs and initiatives to improve efficiency and service reliability. The CPP was an outgrowth of the Port Performance Task Force, or PPTF, which was created in 2013 in response to a convergence of factors that created obstacles to the smooth flow of cargo in the Port of New York and New Jersey. Proud to say that the PTTF was implemented and facilitated under Sustainable Services Group. At the risk of being accused of being a suck-up, I think it's important to thank the commissioners and the staff of the FMC for the work they do in fostering cooperative working agreements among entities subject to the Shipping Act. As you will hear in the testimony, many of the operational efficiencies our company has been able to enjoy and present to the shipping community have had their genesis in FMC-filed agreements. While the Shipping Act creates obligations, it also has provided opportunities that have spawned innovation that have obviated the need for the draconian measures suggested by the petition. The purpose of my testimony today is to voice opposition to the petition at issue that seeks to shift to MTOs the legal, operational, and financial risks for delays caused by port congestion, disruptions, government actions, or weather. The petition addresses commercial matters that are best addressed through commercial relationships and arrangements. It proposes a one-size-fits-all and flexible solution for a problem gleaned from exaggerated port circumstances that have not been replicated recently. The petition primarily focused on events related to West Coast labor issues in 2014 and extraordinary weather conditions on the East Coast in 2014. While I will not address matters pertaining to the West Coast, I can tell you that stakeholders in Port of New York and New Jersey have collectively addressed the issue of potential weather-related delays. Under the auspices of the Port Authority, port stakeholders including Customs and Border Protection, MTOs, the IEPs, railroads, and the motor carrier community, we participate in planning conferences before and during weather-related events. During these conferences, a unified plan of action is discussed, taking each stakeholder's view and circumstances into consideration, a collaborative process. Notwithstanding issues related to the deployment of snow removal and salting of roads, a mechanism has also been created whereby the MTOs can individually assess whether weather conditions warrant the extension of free time for containers not already in demurrage. In addition, the Port Authority does an excellent job in sending out blast emails to the port community with periodic updates on port conditions. This plan was just activated last week. We do not believe the relief suggested by the petition is necessary. In fact, we fear that the proposed regulations will forestall or reverse the significant process that has been made in addressing port delays, offer disincentives for retrieving containers in a timely manner, creating terminal delays, and increase complaints and disputes that will have to be heard by the FMC. We believe that current FMC procedures provide appropriate recourse to the shipping public in abusive practices. This is all about terminal velocity. In 2011, GCT Bayonne embarked on an approximately $350 million terminal expansion project, building the most advanced terminal on the East Coast. Among other things, the project included the construction of a new berth, a new gate complex, container yard expansion, and an M&R facility. Every dollar spent on this project was spent with the goal of ensuring safe, reliable, and consistent cargo handling with decreased processing time for over-the-road truckers. Our goal was to ensure that cargo is never delayed. At the heart of the terminal is our semi-automated rail-mounted gantry yard, which was designed to facilitate easier approaches and departures for truckers. In furtherance of increasing velocity, and to ensure that truckers can get in and out of Bayonne quickly, easily, and most of all safely, each gate is outfitted with optical character recognition software and RFID technology. This has resulted in more efficient process for truckers and a safer work environment. Because of its unique location in the port that does not require Bayonne Bridge air draft clearance, GCT was the only terminal in the Port of New York and New Jersey to receive and service a new class of large container ships. To handle these vessels efficiently and as needed, GCT Bayonne would open as a standing order on Sundays without charge to the stakeholders utilizing the terminal on Sundays to create more velocity. In addition to the physical enhancement of our facility, the terminal upgraded its system technology. Certain aspects of the technology in Bayonne is interrelated with a technology platform created under the Sustainable Services Group. Since its inception, the members of this discussion agreement, sanctioned by the FMC, have addressed important matters concerning the reduction of polluting air emissions from cargo handling equipment, promoting Port of New York as an attractive destination for cargo interests, enhancing marine terminal security, reducing terminal congestion, and enhancing terminal velocity through the truck reservation program. It is a port-wide cargo information portal and reservation system that I'll remark on now. Not long after the Sustainable Group was established, discussions about security ensued. The members noted that there appeared to be a gap in the layered approach to facility security envisioned by MITSA. MITSA laid the foundation for what has become the TWIC program, which requires a positive identification of individuals seeking unescorted access to the terminals. It also requires cargo security and access control procedures. What was missing in this regimen was positive identification of the over-the-road trucks seeking access to terminals. To fill this void, the agreement created STS to develop and implement an RFID tracking system. It was anticipated that captured information would be used for early warning of suspicious activity, a forensic tool in criminal investigations. The system was to have the functionality to enable STS member companies at their own discretion to restrict access to their facilities. Port Authority also saw this RFID system as a potential means of enforcing compliance with its clean truck program. Environmental concerns are of great importance to the company and the members of the agreement. Thereafter, it's also further noted that the system could be leveraged to create a web-based terminal information portal that would provide greater transparency, as we discussed today, to cargo interests and the motor carrier community in seeking information about the availability of expected containers. That portal, now known as TIPS, which stands for Terminal Information Portal System, was established in September of 2015. TIPS was a first-of-its-kind information system designed to enhance terminal efficiencies by reducing uncertainty regarding container availability and unnecessary trouble ticket transactions. While the petition is based on the faulty premise that all matters attendant with port delays are beyond the control of the shipper, receiver, or drayage provider. In fact, shippers, receivers, and drayage providers exercise a great deal of control and do not necessarily utilize tools provided by MTOs to hasten terminal transactions. Often, drayage providers dispatch trucks to marine terminals before containers are available for pickup or without ensuring that outstanding charges have been paid and necessary releases issued. The Port Authority has reported that 7 of the top 10 causes of trouble tickets in Port of New York and New Jersey can be avoided by checking the tip system in advance. In addition to general information regarding port-wide matters and specific announcements, TIPS provides information about container availability, location, regulatory holds, any charges or demurrage, as well as the status of free time. The United States Department of Commerce has singled out TIPS as one of its best practices for improving the nation's competitiveness. TIPS is noteworthy because it was implemented by MTOs not as a product of government regulation, but as a commercial solution created with input provided by cargo interests in the port drayage community. TIPS provides cargo interests in the motor carrier community a one-stop online tool to assist them in managing their business in the port. TIPS, which has been made available to the shipping public at no cost, has been well received. It's prompted the STS to work with its systems developers to enhance its information capabilities. Projects like TIPS are consistent with the mission of the FMC and efforts of the commissioners in encouraging commercial solutions to supply chain challenges. TIPS, which is now being followed by other regional information portals, is consistent with the notion of a nationwide information portal considered by Supply Chain Innovations Teams project authorized by the Commission and spearheaded by Commissioner Dye. In addition to its involvement with implementing TIPS and furtherance of supply chain information transparency, GCT Bayonne is currently in preliminary discussions with GE concerning its optimizer project that is anticipated to provide increased visibility through a shipment's transportation life cycle. But building on the TIPS platform, in January of 2017, our facility implemented a truck reservation system. In the first few weeks of operation, appointments were limited 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. Appointments span a 2-hour window. Shortly after implementation, the demand for appointments increased dramatically and periodically throughout the past year. The window for appointments has grown. Currently, access to GCT Bayonne is only available by appointment from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. After 1 p.m., trucks without appointments are welcome at the terminal. While the system has been in effect for a short period of time, dramatic performance enhancements have been realized even during non-appointment hours. Cargo interests and draymen that may have in the past been reluctant to embrace reservations have articulated a positive response to this new protocol for terminal access. GCT understands that change in behaviors is not something that can be achieved overnight, and it proceeded carefully in implementing this system. While GCT does not assert that a truck reservation system is right for all terminals, it has worked at our facility. We're proud of the fact that trucker utilization has dictated the extension of appointment time slots. The company credits much of the success of the implementation of the reservation system on its early outreach to the motor carrier community and bringing them into the system design phase brainstorming sessions. One factor that has helped improve the program is a reduction in appointments that are booked but not used. We urge truckers that are unable to use an appointment to notify us in advance so the appointment can be offered to others. The effort has helped reduce the no-show rate from 15% early on in the program to less than 5% now. Speaking of no-shows, we do not impose fees for missed appointments or for making initial appointments. On the rare occasions that deterrents are necessary for repeat offenders, we suspend them from making reservations during the peak 6 to 8 a.m. time slot for a period of time. What we have seen thereafter are these former offenders becoming diligent in keeping appointments to ensure they are restored to full privileges. Moreover, GCT incentivizes highly compliant drayage operators by giving them access to additional appointment blocks when needed.
Can we come to a...
Yep, I'm up to my conclusion, trust me. I hope. Several years ago, our parent, GCT, embarked on a proactive effort to enhance velocity at all of its facilities. The measures implemented were unique to the circumstances of each particular terminal. It has been said that when you have seen one terminal, you have seen one terminal. For Bayonne, the answer was semi-automation, RFID-based software systems, and a truck reservation system. For its sister terminal in Staten Island, the answer has been enhanced cargo information, efficient on-dock rail operations, and an on-dock container examination station. In my experience, it is clear that the biggest impediments to terminal velocity are containers stowed on the facility for prolonged periods of time, having to position and reposition idle containers over and over again in stacks slows down the delivery of containers to truckers waiting for them. Marine terminals cannot be treated as storage facilities. Marine terminal space is limited, as we've heard throughout the last 2 days. Extended free time is a detriment to terminal velocity. There must be an incentive for cargo interests to retrieve containers in a timely manner. My company and MTOs throughout the country have collectively invested billions of dollars in enhancements to their facilities in order to efficiently service the larger container ships and to improve landside service. These terminals are fixed in their locations and cannot move. In order to realize a return on their investments, these terminals must provide the level of service that satisfies the needs of their customers. Because customers can exercise choice if a terminal service is not sufficient. MTOs are highly motivated to service Port draymen in a time-effective manner and to clear their terminals of congestion causing containers. For the reasons cited herein, the Commission should deny the petition and continue its efforts in addressing port congestion and delays by fostering commercial solutions similar to the ones I've described today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Commissioner Dye had a request of me. Please proceed. Yes.
Mr. Denike, would you take up where you left off? You were explaining to us the differences among demurrage and what you believed is really a detention and per diem challenge.
Yes. Sorry. Quite frankly, I'm surprised that there's a problem with port demurrage, at least at this magnitude. Port demurrage is when the containers or cargo are on the dock. Again, let me explain. We operate by a port tariff. The port tells us, all terminals, how many days of free time that we should allow. When the container is delivered out, then there's a period of time that the steamship companies allow that container, chassis, or reefer, whatever, to stay out. That's detention and per diem. And that is, from what we see, most of the problem. We very seldom, and we handle a lot of containers in most every steamship line on the West Coast. We don't get problems with demurrage on our behalf. This is the only problems we've had. I've been here 50-something years, so I've been here a long time in this waterfront. We've been collecting demurrage when I was 19 years old, and never had problems like this until containers came in, and then there was per diem and detention added to cargo demurrage. So what we're concerned about, and it's pretty clear and concise, and as I said, 95% of this is import demurrage, not export demurrage. Container comes off the dock, it stays on the dock too long. It's not when it comes into the dock for export, it's when it comes into the dock for import. And that's clear. You have X amount of days. You pick it up. If you don't pick it up, you pay demurrage. There are on the West Coast, we don't have hurricanes, we don't have snow, we don't have very many excuses for an importer not to pick up their container. But if there is a reason, believe me, we'd waiver it very easily. But very seldom is there a reason. Now, if you want to get into facts, what happens is, and, I'll just say it the way it is, truckers will oversell themselves. And you have big truckers on the West Coast that handle a lot of containers. They may tell 5 customers they're going to pick up their container today, but they couldn't pick them up because they didn't have the trucks or there was some reason for it, and they're going to blame the terminal operator. And then when I hear that people can't call a terminal, I don't understand that either. Our people, and I think most people, are very accessible. They can call, they can call right directly to the phone numbers. We don't even go through an operator. Everyone has our numbers. We have terminals where our superintendent's out in the yard. Our truckers and BCOs have their cell numbers. They call them on the cell. Where's my trucker? The trucker the superintendent will look for his trucker, and sometimes they're not there. So that's bothersome when you're here trying to make up fair rules, that govern everybody, because it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, at least on the terminal side. There may be able to be some rules on the steamship line with respect to detention and per diem. I don't know. I don't want to talk to them. But on the terminal side, no. So, and when I'm listening to these issues, at least this morning and from what I heard yesterday, I think people are confusing demurrage, detention, and per diem. And I don't want to be, as a terminal operator who, again, I'm here because I don't care if we didn't bill one dime of demurrage. Demurrage is nothing to us. We want those containers off the dock. And I don't want any reason for anybody to say that they can keep those containers on the dock for any longer than what the port tariff says they should take them. And I'm not sure, is that explaining the question?
Yep, it helps. It helps. I just wanted to make sure that you completed your thought there. Could you explain now? And I've heard other terminal officials discuss the difference between the terminal demurrage and the carrier demurrage. Could you talk a little bit about that too?
Now, terminal demurrage is basically the cargo.
Right.
The cargo. We have nothing to do with the container. Whether it's a reefer, a dry, that's not again, before containerization, demurrage was billed for just cargo. It's still like it was 50 years ago for the terminal operator. It's only the cargo. The demurrage before the container is picked up is demurrage that we bill for the steamship line as part of our demurrage. For an example, if we bill $200 a day, $180 approximately is a steamship company demurrage for their equipment. Ours is 10% or less. But then the BCO trucker gets upset at us because we're billing X amount of days, thinking that it's all going to the terminal operator. It's not going to the terminal operator. And like I say, we have the ability to waiver our part, but we don't have the ability to waiver their part. And in some cases, there's a reason why the carrier does not want to waiver their part. And I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but this is the way the terminals operate. And you guys have to understand that, and the BCOs have to understand it. The truckers need to understand it. I don't think anybody really realizes how this demurrage process works. Then when it leaves, that goes on per diem on so much a day for the container, and it goes on per diem for the chassis too. We don't bill any of that. That has nothing to do with us. The steamship company bills that, and the chassis owner bills that. So the only thing we bill is that demurrage before the container leaves terminal.
Mr. Atkins, do you have anything to add on that?
Other than confirm, it is a very common practice under terminal service agreements that the MTO, on behalf of the carrier, will collect the demurrage for them up front, so it does
Right.
come through on one bill. And then, there's a settling up at the end of the month. So it's, again, it's a very common practice.
Right, thank you. Thank you, thank you very much. No.
Mr. Denike, we've had previous testimony from some witnesses that the shippers constantly beneficial cargo interest, while they have choice with the vessel operator, they don't really have a choice as to the terminal they'll use. And I think an example was cited with now with alliances that they don't even really know per se. They know they're going to the port of wherever, Seattle, Tacoma, but they don't know exactly which terminal that ship may go to. And as I understand that you have said that shippers do have a choice, they select the port, the carrier, and the licensed motor carrier. Can you, is there a inconsistency in that, or is there, help reconcile for me so I understand?
Well, I don't know, maybe I wasn't clear. Normally when there are alliances, certain services go to certain terminals. Even though there may have 4 or 5 services within the alliance, services normally go to certain terminals. So the export or the BCO should know what terminal those ships are going to. And I think the carriers are pretty clear, notifying the BCOs and truckers which terminal those ships are going to. Now, if you're asking me, do they have a choice of what ships that they're going to? No, they don't have a choice. The BCO does not have a choice. On the other hand, you have more terminal operators now that are trying to convince the carriers to use their terminals. So terminals like us are actually trying to do a better job for the carriers so that the carriers will want to use us. And we now have created relationships with the BCOs that we never had before. I heard earlier BCOs don't have relation with terminal operators. Well, we have very good relations with many BCOs. BCOs will let this PLA program that I talked about, it's all between us directly with BCOs, not through the carrier. And as I said, the carrier, the BCOs or truckers talk to us all the time. So now, do they have a legal contract with us? No, because our contract is with the carrier, not with the trucker or the BCO. So again, they don't have a choice where that ship goes to, but normally, they should know where that ship is going to, because the carriers are very careful to try to not confuse the community as to what ships are going where under these alliance programs.
Thank you. That does help clarify. Mr. Crowley, you.
Mr. Chairman, I might only observe that certainly at the time the alliances were formed, there might have been an instantaneous shifting of berths, and that might have caused confusion amongst a lot of people, but that's not a routine event. And certainly out of those that I've heard from, report that even cargo interests visit terminal operations to witness and to evaluate them prior to their carrier negotiations. So implicitly, I've got to believe that there's a feedback loop, and whether they can contract for one or another is maybe a fine point, but they have an influence, I would submit.
Yes, I think everyone remembers the history of as the alliances, what are we at now? 4.0, whatever it may be, that there was some sorting out between the alliance members, each alliance member, and which individual MTOs would be served, and that has stabilized itself out. Serendipity, if I can, you have any other comments on that question? Then just move on. A Journal of Commerce article here last week, I guess it was, 2 more New York, New Jersey terminals prep for truck appointment systems. And Mr. Atkins, they mentioned your terminal. You familiar with this article?
Yes,
And
I did not write it, but I am familiar with it.
no, but I thought one of the things that was interesting is as the group worked through and found operating differences inside of the same port with 2 different terminals, and how you had to, felt it best to adjust the appointment systems from one to the other. If you could comment on that for the record.
Sure, we had the, I would say fortunate, not an enviable position of having all the pieces of the puzzle to start an appointment system in first at Bayonne. So we went ahead while working with the other terminal operators in the STS group to work out the basic platform with a software company. And it'll enable the overall appointment system to still be able to go through one single source, one portal. However, each terminal will maintain its own individuality and its business rules and, what it will and will not allow with the appointment system. And the reason that when we kicked it off, when we started it from only 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., is we brought the drayage community in early on in the process. And they were the ones who woke us up when they said, well, you can't put an appointment system in all day, because if you're going to be the only one, what if we're at other facilities and, we get held up? If everybody's on an appointment system, that's differently. So, the light bulb went off and we said, okay, how about if we start the first few hours of the day? So at least you could start your day there. It is each, we knew that we could fill the next hour with appointments based on demand. We added an hour, and that's why we're up to 1 o'clock now in the afternoon. And, in a lot of ways, it works very well. I mean, we're pushing 73% on average of our overall gate transactions through that window from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. And then from 1 to 5 or 1 to 6, we do the remaining 27%. So people that want to make the appointments can still get the consistency and level of service they come to expect from 6 to 1. And people that maybe don't have the flexibility or for whatever reason didn't want to partake still have the afternoon hours to come in and pick up containers afterwards. So we thought it was a good way to get it implemented and get it started in New York.
Thank you. And I mean, it struck me as another very current day example of how good collaboration and work with all the various stakeholders, and that competition word can come up with superior results.
Yes.
In terms of efficiency.
Yes,
So,
sir.
Let me yield and turn to my colleague, Commissioner Maffei.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too was excited to see you try an appointment system, and I don't know if you passed judgment on it, but I know there was some resistance, and and on a number of different sides. But I still think it's important to try, and it sounds like you've had some success, and hopefully some of those people are coming around. But I want to turn back to this commission and this petition, and I'm a little confused here. because there seems to be some rather significant discrepancies between what the three of you are saying and what the last panel said, and both the MTOs and the carriers opposed the petition. Nothing to see here. There's, there may be individual problems, but we're working it out. And we had this, the LA Long Beach slowdown and stuff like that, but that's, we've worked a lot of that out. And yet, I am extraordinarily confused about exactly how this works now, because the carriers seem to imply that they do a lot of collecting and passing on demurrage charges, and sometimes they can waive charges, and everybody does, and that's fine. But sometimes the MTOs still charge, and the carriers say, well, we'll eat the loss. And there was at least one carrier representative that testified that they lose money on the whole deal. And then you are, I think, saying that no, it's the carriers that really are imposing most of this. And I know, Mr. Denike, you mentioned the 10% of the demurrage is MTO, and the other 90% is actually carrier demurrage. Can any of you help me out to try to figure out how to reconcile these two approaches to the testimony?
If I can start out, Commissioner, and by virtue of having spoken to 11 different operators in 14 different locations, my lesson was that everybody's right. That because of operational circumstances, because of the power of bargaining and the market factors that exist, there are different answers that come out. I would say that there are both carrier and terminal operators. You had 3 carriers in today. There are others that you didn't have in. And you would likely get some different responses. I think the common answer, though, is that all of those that I've spoke to, and I'll defer to my colleagues here to answer from their perspective, that the commercial transaction and the negotiations that are occurring deliver a result that is predictable to the parties that have financial interests at stake, and that in each of the locations. And it's a different calculus in each location. New York, New Jersey, LA, Long Beach, 2 high-profile markets, but they're different. And then you get to smaller markets down the Southeast and the Gulf, and you're going to find many greater differences. And the lines and the terminal operators, even if they are the same company, will react differently to a different piece of property located in different geography, different constraints operationally in terms of how much grounded area there is if you have reefers out or some other factor. So there's a lot of reasons, but let's come back to, we both oppose the petition for reasons that I think we rely on the negotiations, and these guys don't even participate in the commercial negotiation between the cargo interest and the carrier, and they still want to rely on that to be functional, and not to have that somehow brokered from afar in terms of how they make decisions and take away their flexibility later when things go burp in the local arena. And again, rely instead on the local factors and those that know them to best deal with them when they occur.
Yeah, let me chime in on here. Did the terminal operator normally, like us, all of our terminal, we bill our demurrage. Now, there will, no steamship company bills our demurrage unless they tell us that they will absorb the demurrage for a particular account that they have. They'll say, this account ABC, because of their competition with other carriers, they'll decide they'll pay the demurrage. We'll bill the steamship company demurrage instead of the trucker or the BCO, because that's what they're saying, but we're billing it. They then, and I believe most of the time, absorb that demurrage, but they may bill that demurrage also. I don't know. The other thing is on export demurrage. Because normally terminal operators do not receive export containers. If the ship is late and there is demurrage to be billed, then that demurrage is billed to the carrier, not to anybody else. And that carrier then may decide to bill the demurrage, but it's also my understanding that most of the time they absorb it. So when they're saying they're billing demurrage, at least for us, and I think most terminal operators, it's because they have agreed to absorb the demurrage at the terminal operator, their portion of the terminal.
And Mr. Deneke, you stand by this 90% is the carrier and 10% is the MTO. And assuming you do, is that generalizable, or is that really just you folks?
No, I think let me say this. The rates for the terminal operators are consistent. They're there and they're based upon port tariffs. The carrier rates are different because they're negotiable. So we may have, but our rates are there. Everyone can see if they want through a port tariff what we're getting because it's out there. But when it comes to the carriers make their own deals with their customers depending on competitive reasons as to what they want to do, how much they want to charge, how much free time they want to give, and that kind of thing. But with us, we don't. The terminal operators can't do that. We have a tariff that we have to follow. Each port governs that tariff, and that's it. But when you look at what we bill, when we do bill it, the portion that goes to the terminal operator is minute compared to the portion that goes to the carrier. But the person paying that might not understand that. And again, I'm just saying facts. And I just want everyone to understand what, clearly, how this works. Again, as I initially said, we're concerned that this is so complex on the carrier side that you're going to have to feel that you have to do something. But it's not that complex on the terminal operator side. It's controlled by port tariffs, and we don't want that changed. I don't want some rule that says now they can, because they got a flat tire on the freeway, they can keep their container at the terminal for 3 more days. That's the concern that we have.
Just one other question for this round, and I asked this of the last panel. So yesterday it was claimed that a good portion of the time, or at least a good portion of the time when there's an issue, the full demurrage charge is assessed or has to be collected before a container will be released, even if there is a dispute. Is that true, one? And two, is that the sort of thing that sounds reasonable? I mean, if your goal is really to keep the containers moving and you're collecting it, why not collect half or a portion of it before?
Look at, every truck knows every trucker should know what the demurrage is going to be before they arrive. They can, we have Emoto on the West Coast, we can look on the internet, everything is right there. If I'm a trucker, I'm gonna look at that container number, I know what the demurrage is before I even come. If I've had a problem with that, I'm gonna call the terminal operator. And I'll argue that ahead of time, not before the trucker. Very seldom is there a necessity for a trucker to argue once he's there, unless they haven't done their job by looking ahead to see what that demurrage is going to be. They have the opportunity, and they all know that they can see what it is. A lot of times, it's billed. Because if we know the trucker, we know the BCO, and we know that we can trust them to pay, we'll bill it. They don't have to pay it. But if there are a lot of fly-by-night companies, we're not going to bill. And they're going to have to pay us before they pick it up. But if they have a problem with that demurrage amount, they call and they talk, and sometimes they do that, and we'll explain it. And again, if we feel that they have a legitimate reason, we'll waive it. Because I don't want one of our steamship company customers going to the steamship company and complaining about us. I don't want that. It's not worth it to us. If somebody has a legitimate reason, they didn't pick up the candidate, our managers know, waive that demurrage, because I don't want some steamship company calling me, telling me that their customer is complaining because they had to pay demurrage when they couldn't. And I'll tell you, we do not get, there isn't a conflict here.
Just to clarify, your managers have the authority to waive the demurrage, but that's just the, as you pointed out, that's just the MTO demurrage. Do they still have to collect for the carriers?
And in some cases, that's a problem. And I'm, to be honest, again, because we don't want a carrier customer complaining about us, we bend over pretty well. And I think most terminal operators do. But there are times when a carrier doesn't feel that it's warranted to, and then we'll have to say, we'll waiver our demurrage, but we can't waiver their demurrage. And that's what we do.
But in either case, you collect the carrier demurrage
Yes.
beforehand. Okay. That's the same strategy.
But again, they know what that demurrage, the carrier demurrage is before they come into that terminal. And all that can be done
You made that
ahead of
point,
time.
yeah. Okay.
It's not while the truck's sitting at the terminal.
And I think Mr. Denick brings up a valid point when we talk about terminal efficiency, velocity, port congestion. I mean, prior to our appointment system, 24% of all our gate transactions were going to the trouble window, which means those drivers came down, container wasn't ready to go for whatever reason, some may be ours, but a lot of the cargo interests. And then they have to go to the trouble window and work through that. But once we put the appointment system in place, we're now down to single digits because everything needs to be cleared and done before it gets there. So now a driver gets in, driver gets out. So to Ed's point, if it's looked at ahead of time and there's, an issue or a question on demurrage that may be an exorbitant charge, I don't know if there's an MTO out there that's not going to say, okay, let's research it, we find out there's a problem, we're going to issue a credit. And then they'll deal with the carrier on it. But just to clarify a little bit, because now we're starting to get into terminal service agreements, and I don't think we want to get down there, but we collect, it's general practice in New York to collect terminals demurrage after the free days. So if driver comes in to pick up a load of anchovies, there's your third element for your pizza, Commissioner Maffei. And it's 3 days in demurrage. He pays the 3-day demurrage for the terminal and the 3-day demurrage for the carrier. We collect it all, and then at the end of the month, we give the carrier their piece back. Unless there is a difference in New York, to some degree, I don't want to speak for all terminals, but there are service contracts. And, there's a certain percentage of cargo that moves through on service contracts that we don't collect the terminal demurrage either. And those containers sit. And again, that's works against velocity on the marine terminal. But we realize that's a commercial consideration, and we do it for our customers.
Those answers are helpful. Thank you. That's all my time for this round.
Using big thumbs, what percent of these charges are billed on a normal business credit relationship, and what percent would you hold a container before it's released?
For us, I can't give you, I'd have to tell you with our people, but if I had to guess, the majority is billed. It's not, we don't want people bringing checks to the terminal. So if we can bill it, or sometimes it's on a credit card, that's the way we do it. We do not want truckers bringing checks or money to the terminal if at all possible. So I would say most of it is billed either on a billing or through a credit card type of thing.
A normal business ratio that look at is bad debt, uncollectible accounts. Is this a problem issue, or is this in?
We have accounts set up with most of the big brokers in the industry, so we extend credit to brokers and then bill them after the fact. We do have a handful of truckers and even a handful of shippers, but I'd say probably 60% is billed and collected, prior to the container, either somebody coming down or leaving the facility. We offer a couple electronic ways of paying to make it easier. But I'm glad you brought the point up about receivables. If you look at our receivables statement, average statement goes 30, 60, 90, 120. If you look at it 180, where ours stops and above, there's no money on the steamship side of that balance sheet. It's all accounts where we've been, granted credit, and they shut down as trucker ABC and opened up as DEF or whatever it is. So that's why you see less and less. And now with today's technology, when you can pay online and PayPal or whatever, it's just a heck of a lot easier. So, but again, I think the common theme that you've heard throughout the last 2 days is if somebody comes back after the fact, we have commercial relationships with not just the carriers, but we probably have more cargo interests that come down into our facility than we do ocean carriers and truckers. We get more calls for truckers saying, hey, I may have screwed up yesterday, or this happened yesterday. Can you give me another day on these 2 boxes? Or what can you do for me? So, we're in business to move volume. We're not here to shut everybody out. So I think you'll see most marine terminal operators are going to work with people on that. But you can't extend credit, and then, we all have shareholders and owners. When they look at their receivables 180 days out of money you're never going to collect. It doesn't work.
With
Yes,
us, we collect, I would say, 95% of it. There are companies, small fly-by-night companies who go out of business, and we don't collect from them. If we're not paid, we don't service them in the future. So that's basically it. So we really have no problem collecting what's billed for the most part.
One last thing, John, do you want to add to that?
In terms of what the problem set is, it's not in the majority of the activities. When you look at the statements and all, what I hear is the majority of the problem are those exceptions. And the exceptions, not to point fingers in one category or the other, but might be that trucker that has told the cargo interest, you're good to pick up within your demurrage period. And so they're all paid up. And they come in and they got to deliver the delta because it wasn't picked up and it was on their ticket. And now you got, a third party that neither one's got a financial relationship with. And this causes then potentially a problem that the shipping interest doesn't even know about, because who wants to tell them? Who's going to explain that? And so the shipping interests feel they have a viable complaint here. And yet there was this other little piece out there that never got explained. And that's the utility of the remedy system that exists today that doesn't, when not carried through to the logical conclusion, those kind of facts get lost in the noise level. And I just would urge that whatever we do, we encourage that the system that's in place today gets used so that we can truly parse some of those facts in a better and more helpful way for all concerned.
Yes, and appreciate some of the questions from me and all of my colleagues is to make sure that the record is as full and complete as possible. One last question, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Dye. Earlier, an excellent witness talking about, and again, his situation and his reality, but that a terminal had said that this is what we have to charge because it's part of the tariff, and that under the filed rate doctrine, they can't negotiate it. I don't know how often that particular, we've moved past filed rate doctrine on the freight side of things between the vessel operators and BCOs. To what extent is filed rate doctrine still a part of the practice and lexicon on the terminal side?
I think that the informal practice of if you have a port-wide tariff, its utility is to set out very clear guidance. Its utility, as in all rules, cite for if you form a policy guidance in the future, their utility is if people follow it. And so there is a tendency, a greater tendency, to follow uniformly and strictly a port-wide tariff than there is if you operate under a service agreement, where the in totality of the agreement is different. I don't want to speak to people's knowledge and intent necessarily with respect to the doctrine, but I did hear, and I can speak to the informal practice. The more certain the tariff is, the more likely it is to be strictly followed.
Yeah, I understand that we have a tariff to follow with respect to free time and when demurrage starts. But that revenue is terminal revenue. It's not port revenue. So we have the, freedom if we want to waiver demurrage. It's our money. It's not anyone else's money. So for that, I'm not sure what happened with that instance. Maybe, again, it may have been per diem, it might have been detention, it might have been, something other than port tariff demurrage. So, years ago, that money went to the port. When you leased a terminal, I'm talking about 30, 35 years ago, you followed, on the West Coast anyway, I'm not sure here on the East Coast, you followed and the terminal operator didn't have that right to waiver. But over the years, we've negotiated the demurrage revenue to be terminal revenue based upon the enormous amount of money we're paying for rent. So again, what he says, what this gentleman said may have happened years ago. I can't see that happening now. So with all of these cases, and we talked about this earlier, when people talk that way, we need to know the exact facts of what happened in that case to understand why he paid what he did. We can't talk in generalities. So
I appreciate it. Thank you, Commissioner Dye.
Well, in generalities, what's the biggest reason that demurrage accrues in your experience?
for cargo demurrage, it's couple of things. And again, people aren't going to like what I'm hearing. It's because the importer doesn't have space to pick up the cargo, doesn't have anywhere to put it, or because the trucker.
A warehouse, no space, for example?
Yeah, in other words, he only has space for 10 containers and he's got 25 containers on the dock. Or a trucker has oversold himself. As far as I'm concerned, very little of it is because of a terminal operator responsibility. And, and that's the honest truth.
Okay, Mr. Atkins, what's your experience?
Two reasons. The service contracts that we see with large shippers with large numbers of containers is just utilizing free space is our experience.
But that doesn't cause demurrage to accrue, does it?
No.
No.
No,
Right.
you're right. But,
Okay.
I mean, it's idling containers for
Right.
many weeks. As for demurrage to accrue, it's generally, the trucker has not been in to pick it up. Now, I won't put the one paintbrush that they bit off more than they could chew. They may have been stuck at another facility. We are in the tri-state area. We have very congested traffic areas. So, just getting around northern New Jersey, that could be any number of reasons. So it's generally the trucker not getting in on time. And we can look, when we get phone calls from various truckers, hey, this happened, that happened, you kind of know the trucking company's history. If they're good guys, something happened, they're never picking up the phone, when somebody's had a true incident that you could work with them on, versus habitual repeat offenders who are constantly calling, just, looking for relief.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you have any follow-up questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to ask Mr. Crowley, and you didn't bring this up in your spoken testimony, but I believe I read some treatment of it in the comments from the National Association of Waterfront Employers. Do you dispute that the Federal Maritime Commission has the authority to issue a legislative or an interpretive rule concerning the issues brought up in the petition? Or do you believe we do have that authority?
Well, I believe there's certainly authority. I thought Mr. Butler's answer was probably more educated than I can give you at the moment. I think most of our problems are with the application within the facts that are interposed here today. But I'm happy to get back to you on that answer.
Yeah, it would be helpful, and I don't want to belabor the time
fair.
on it, but obviously, we don't want to act outside of our authority. There was at least in the written responses disagreement on that, but if we can get to, so that's good. So if we do an interpretive rule, if we say offer general guidelines, and I did ask a very similar question of the previous panel, if we just define, whatever egregious practices that we can identify as unreasonable, what is the harm in doing that, given that it sounds to me like, most of the time, most of your members are not engaging in those?
I would say that I'd start with the statement that it's a difficult road. From my experience in working regulations and building them, it's a very difficult road to get to the point where you can say clearly that this is the uniform application across the industry, and this can be helpful for the industry on a commercial matter. But it can be done. I'll grant you that. I'm not going to argue that point. Difficult road. But then what you get is, if this is my Pillsbury Doughboy example, you poke in, you're going to poke out someplace else. You are interfering with the commercial applications and the negotiations that exist, where I believe there are knowing and able negotiators and participants in these contract formulations. I give great esteem to the cargo interests, to the carriers, to our colleagues here on the table to do a good job and to solve these problems. And they, if they make a mistake, can fix the problem of the next contract. If you push in at the wrong spot where it comes out where you didn't intend it to, it's a little bit more of a challenge for you to do that. And this is where the commercial system works. As a formal regulator that did a lot of this, it was always happy to do a basic industry-wide regulation that executed a statute. It always made sense if you had a federal purpose to specifically, guide and stay away from danger. But those cases where you started becoming involved in the commercial system, they were difficult, number one, and they never seemed to work out well. And we ended up with a series of directions afterward to change it because we didn't make somebody happy. And I just offer that as
Yeah.
the explanation.
Yeah,
for
your
my
point is well
position.
taken, and thank you for your service, Admiral, and the
That's
Coast Guard. I do want to follow up, though, a little bit. Correcting in the contract makes sense, but most of the time, the shippers don't have direct contracts with the MTOs. They have contracts with the carriers. You have contracts with the carriers. So in those instances, since there aren't direct contracts, it makes it more challenging to negotiate these things out in a contract. Again, look, I completely understand your answer, given that I'm giving you a theoretical question. Like, well, what if we did these guidelines and said these things are unreasonable? And maybe we would, you don't know what we would say is unreasonable. But still, there would have to, in order to actually enforce it, you'd have to go through an adjudication process, just as you do now. And I think you said, that was a good thing to have. So if we're just sort of clarifying what generally, in general terms, made sense to us, but we're not tying the hands of any administrative law judge or even ourselves on appellate matters, what would be the harm in that?
So first of all, you certainly have authority to make interpretive rules. No, I'm not going to dispute that. The question is, do you want to? The first part of the question is, I am not as, I don't accept as quickly that the cargo interests can't influence the result on the terminal surface. I just don't see that in reality. I see next that, at least in the way the petitioners couch their relief, and you may form a different fashion of relief, that not only was there an interpretive guidance offered, and I'm not sure that I heard that when I read their petition, but I hear that today. But in their petition, it was clear to me that what they also did was shift the burden of bringing that litigation or that dispute resolution to the LAJ, to the commission, to wherever the remedy should be found. And
I'm sorry to interrupt, but by shift the burden, you mean you would have to prove that it's reasonable or not unreasonable, as opposed to them having to prove that it's reasonable. Is that what you mean? I'm trying to clarify what you mean. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
No, I think that's a fair statement. The burden is now shifted, and these guys are going to have to go in and say, this was a controllable event by the people, and they don't have the proof of that. The people who have the proof as to whether the truck was on the place on the time, aside from the RFID kind of situation, exists someplace else. And they can bring the proof that we did everything that we were supposed to do and we couldn't get out the gate. Now that avoids the question yet to be raised of if there is no one at fault. And if you listen to the petitioner's presentation, if no one's at fault, they're certainly not at fault. And then these guys are on the hook. And that is their choice, it seems to me, that if they want to waive demurrage because the shipping interest wasn't at fault, they should be able to do that. But they shouldn't be told to do that. So I mean, there's a couple different parts to this I kind of parse out.
It's a tough rabbit hole to go down. You're taking a quantitative problem and trying to layer a qualitative kind of process to adjudicate it. To John's point, don't underestimate the influence that a BC owner shipper has on a terminal. I mean, first of all, they do have the option of going and dealing with their carrier, who the terminal does have the relationship with. And the carrier can step in their behalf. But as I spoke earlier, there is a lot more instances where the MTOs have relationships now with the shippers. In the first 32 years that I was in this business, everything you heard at contract negotiations between the carrier and the MTO was marine productivity, marine productivity. Now, last year, through all the alliance negotiation, I heard it twice. It's all about landside productivity, landside productivity. And carriers now, when they are selecting their terminals, are saying, will you be able to get my freight out quickly? Because if you can't, I won't have the freight and I can't fill my ship. So don't underestimate the influence that the BCO has on the MTO through the carrier.
Yeah, I want to make sure that that's understood. At every one of our terminals, we have a customer service department with anywhere from 4 to 8 people. That's all they do is talk to BCOs and truckers every day. So for a BCO or a trucker to say they have, no relation with us, it's just mind-boggling to me. Now, do they have a signed contract with us? No. But do they call us? Do they talk to us on a daily basis? They send our people fruit, candy, Coke, whatever they want to try to get them working together. And this, so I don't understand why anybody is saying that they don't have relationships with us.
Good. So one last question, and it has to go to Mr. Crawley. So there is a little bit of confusion, though, I think. I mean, these are two, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you are independent. You are not owned, at least not substantially, by any carrier line. But there are many MTOs that are substantially owned by a carrier line. That may be part of the confusion, and I guess I just want to give you an opportunity to address that. Is part of this that if a carrier owns a substantial amount of an MTO, does that complicate things? Is the MTO really able to act independently and have its own relationships with BCOs from the carriers?
I would say within some limitations, the marine terminal operator acts independently. Now, I'm not sure that any MTO acts completely independently of the carrier that's paying their bills. So let's start at where the starting point is here, which is everybody has an influence on the person they're paying. There probably is more influence in terms of procedures. There are going to be different practices in terms of, which demurrage is going to be more or less, but all of those things should be clear, in my experience, at the time of the negotiation of the original cargo contract. You're signing up with a vessel that's going to end up at a vessel-owned terminal where the answer is going to be different than it would be. And the same so if you had a service contract or something else. I mean, there are various differences as you go around the country that are just clear. And you can draw some stereotypes, but they're just differences.
I thank this panel. It's been, I was generous with time. We had enough time, and I appreciate it. The petitioners themselves, I had asked if, seeing how they went first, they've had an opportunity to hear this. It is their petition. If they would like to come up and have the opportunity to respond. So what I'd like to do, again, thank you so much. Thanks to every one of the panels. But without taking a break, we're right on the edge if we can. Karen, you all not going to be too long? What do you think?
We'll be very brief.
Take what your time, but I think it'd be easier to, rather than take a break and come back, is let's just shift right here and give the petitioners a
Have a nice high seat. I like them high. Oh, okay. Usually I need a booster.
The floor is yours.
Commissioners, thank you very much. As we indicated, we will be brief here on a very quick rebuttal. I guess I'd just start by saying yesterday you indicated there may be some additional written questions that come our way, and there was one or two issues specifically that we plan to follow up in writing on as well. But having sat through the testimony today, we wanted to cover just a few additional points, and of course, if you had additional questions, we're happy to answer those. Number one, listening to the carriers and terminals today, you would be led to believe there's just no problem here. I think Commissioner Maffei, nothing to see here, as you said, move along, all this gets resolved, and essentially what you're hearing are simply just kind of one-off exception situations. That's just simply not the case. I think that you have a petition filed by 26 organizations. It's not one company, it's not one trade association, it's 26 organizations, multiple industries, multiple commodities, over 100 comments filed in this record. And American businesses don't hire Washington lawyers, take time out of their businesses to come to DC to appear at a hearing unless it's serious and there's a real problem. And so with that, I think, again, Commissioner Maffei, you said there's clearly a disconnect here. And we would indicate that when there's a disconnect between industry and industry is just seeing a problem in two very different ways, that is precisely the time that the regulators need to step in and help industry solve this problem. And so that's, I guess, first. Number two, the carriers in particular claim there's vigorous competition here. That fixes everything. They're doing everything they can to keep their customers happy. And we don't doubt that they try to do that in a number of cases, of course. But there's other forces at play here, which is why the commercial market isn't working to solve the problem. The most obvious one, of course, leverage. We heard about that. The small and mid-sized guys just can't get the terms on free time demurrage detention in their contracts. But even the very biggest of the big came before you to say, in some markets, in some places, there isn't adequate competition. We can't get what we need. But the very real problem, probably the most important aspect of this, is the structural one. It's that the shippers and the draymen are negotiating with the ocean carriers and not with the terminals. And we heard it directly from the parties here today. They have no contractual privity with the BCOs. The carriers, in some respects, are in the middle. It's a tough situation. The shipper comes to them, we have a problem, this isn't fair, we need to mitigate. They have to go back to the terminal, who has its own tariff, who you heard today is enforceable in most cases, especially when it's clear. And that puts the carriers in a bind. They're going to have to pay the demurrage to the terminals. That makes it difficult for them to fix the BCO problem. Sometimes it gets waived, sometimes it doesn't. It's very confusing and inconsistent, and I think we heard that today. So again, the commercial solutions alone can't fix the problem. Commissioner Dye, you read some tariff language into the record that are current tariffs that are in existence, and you compared that to the proposed policy statement, and even noted that those existing tariffs are broader in some respects than the policy statement itself. And thinking about that, and our view on that is, aren't existing commercial practices by some carriers and terminals a good indicator of what may be reasonable? Doesn't that provide at least a good starting point for consideration? And the coalition is not asking you to break new ground here. We don't want to create new obligations and requirements that are going to make things more complicated, make things less efficient, completely the opposite. But we do think those existing tariffs from good actors are a reasonable indication here of where we might look to see what some good actors are doing and how that maybe could be encouraged to be done to a greater extent. And fourth and finally, I do have to disagree strongly with my friend John Butler on a couple points. On some of the legal issues, we will follow up in writing, not to belabor things here. But on another point, we just disagree strongly that all of you and the staff at this agency can't figure this out. He noted that the lack of cases, the lack of litigation, the lack of precedent means you have a very high risk of getting it wrong if you act proactively. We disagree. We are confident you can get it right, and you can provide some clarity to industry as to what is unreasonable with respect to demurrage and detention practices. And we really do strongly believe that this guidance will help industry resolve disputes more on their own, given the confusion that currently exists. It's not overly complicated. The Shipping Act does give you this authority to help fix these unfair situations. And with that, we just strongly urge you to adopt the petition and move this forward and issue guidance to industry to help solve the problem. I'll say thank you very much for holding these hearings. We really do appreciate the opportunity. I think we all learned a lot over the last couple days, and we're happy to answer any additional questions.
Well, thank you for appearing not once but twice. I hope you appreciate that out of a sense of fairness that to give you as the petitioners a chance to wrap up. There's, as so many things in life, glass half full, half empty, et cetera. I won't, but I do, as I perhaps suggested earlier, and anything I say, please, I do have as open a mind as I could possibly have, and very honestly trying to sort through, what is the right thing to do here. Costco, I mean, I was interested, if I may just comment, that with all of the incoming inquiries that we had, and we're obviously in a position to really have at least a finger on that particular pulse of superstorms, or Hurricane Sandy, some of the other issues. Well, obviously, before that, the labor problems on the West Coast, others that our great people in Caters were bouncing between pillar and post, trying to work on things. And it was actually the question didn't come into mind until a witness brought it up, of all of the sequence of hurricanes, and we didn't have a repeat of that. And it was like, has the industry learned something here? It's, is it better? Not perfect, not there was any, but have processes gotten more efficient? And as we work through that, and the Costco tariff issue of, reasonable, good actors, et cetera, I'll put it this way, and I don't mean to try to be over rhetorical. I don't think you mean to suggest that let's pick that and somehow or another now have the government come in and impose that particular tariff on the whole industry. But again, it would appear that competition, always slow perhaps to respond, but that the marketplace is responding, perhaps not as efficiently, but so I'll stop with that for just a minute. I'll turn to my colleague. I'll have a couple of observations at the end of this. Thanks.
Oh, no, thank you. I do have a couple questions for the record, more technical questions. So thank you very much.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Dye. I don't think I have any questions. I appreciate you coming back, and And obviously, the record remains open. Madam Secretary, will you clarify how long the record is open for?
Through next Friday, the 26th.
For all sides, so, I don't want to make anybody feel that there aren't last licks here. I do believe that I do believe, and I believe we've established here that the commission does indeed have the authority to issue a legislative or an interpretive rule, certainly has the authority to respond to this petition. Now, the question is, should we? That is something that I'm not decided on whether or exactly how, but I am very confident that working with the acting chairman and my other distinguished colleague, we'll be able to figure that out. We are going to continue to take this very seriously. We're looking and talking to as many people. I'm going to be in Dallas and Houston next week talking to interests on both sides as well. So, clearly, I guess what I want to say is sort of to compliment everybody. This, I think, has been a great 2 days of hearings. I have done my best to ask difficult and challenging questions of all sides, and I have to say I feel that they really were answered well by all the panelists. I don't, and in terms of the process, and Mr. Chairman, I do appreciate your liberal enforcement of the clock, and both you and Commissioner Dye asked some really excellent questions. So, in a world where people are become cynical about government and government's interaction with the public, I feel both us, our staff, of course, and the shipping public and interests have really responded well. So because of that, I'm very optimistic about this process. I can almost guarantee that no one will be completely happy, but I do think that it's been a very good process, and I want to thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for that and for recognizing me.
Thank you. A couple of observations. The last 2 days, to the extent we thought we understood how the business worked, I find every day I learn a little bit more about a piece, a corner of the marine business. Of course, I just started in 1971, and I hope to continue living for many years, and I'll keep learning. A colleague of mine long past, pilot of some repute, one of his many, many sayings, for every complicated situation, someone comes up with one single answer, and it's almost always wrong. So says pilot Mark Twain. A more contemporary business writer, probably the dean of all businessmen, Peter Drucker, says, when you're faced with a situation, a problem, the first thing you have to decide, is it systemic or is it episodic? If it's the first, deal with it and deal with it properly. If it's the second, leave it alone. That's great for private business. I think, are we in a situation, I think playing off of what Commissioner Maffei just said, are there some places in between that we need to seriously look at? Where do we, with a judicious hand, step in and try to make things better, recognizing that we're not going to be able to solve all problems in this particular area. It's, if nothing else, not to complain, but it is going to be a difficult choices as we move forward. I can assure you we've already had a discussion, blessed by our general counsel, that as soon as the record is over, or closed, excuse me, we plan, the three of us plan to have a closed session and make decisions as to next steps as promptly as possible. So this will not just be a lingering issue. Last, I've thanked several times all of the witnesses. For those of you who have been involved in these kinds of hearings, I'm sure you appreciate how much staff time it takes to successfully accomplish these, and I want to just make a special comment for the Federal Maritime Commission staff, many of them here, many of them still upstairs doing their job, how much I personally appreciate all the hard work, and I know that Commissioner Dye and Commissioner Maffei share that praise. So unless someone else wants to raise their hand and ask another question, I'll adjourn these hearings. Thank you.